Friday, 5:43 p.m. Hawthorne's market buzzed with the usual end-of-week crowd, the soft hum of shopping carts gliding over polished stone floors, faint jazz music drifting from ceiling speakers, the relentless rhythm of barcode scanners and card readers. At the imported foods aisle, where bottles of fish sauce and bundles of rice noodles were arranged with sterile precision, a petite woman moved slowly, picking out each item as though afraid of disturbing the air around her. She wore a worn-out sweater, despite the mild weather outside, faded canvas shoes, and carried an old cloth tote bag. To most eyes, she blended into the background like part of the store's scenery. Her name was Min Lei, but no one here knew that. To nearly everyone, she was just an old Asian lady. Nothing more, nothing less. Her English was limited, but she knew exactly what she needed. A stalk of lemongrass, a bottle of fish sauce, 2 scallions, a small pack of rice noodles. All for one purpose: to make porridge for her grandson, who had been coughing so hard he could barely speak, refusing to eat anything except the dish. She had ordered everything in advance through the store's app, paid in full, but she still wanted to check in person, because sometimes the essentials she needed were missing. She wasn't looking for trouble, certainly not an argument. She just wanted to make sure that after years of quiet living, she could still choose the things that mattered most to her family, with her own hands. As she approached the express checkout line, holding a printed receipt from home, the ink slightly faded, the eyes of the checkout manager, Megan Farrow, locked onto her like she'd just spotted a red flag. Megan, about 35, was impeccably dressed, hair tied neatly back, clipboard in hand. She didn't care for complications, and liked non-conformity even less, especially when it came from unusual customers. Megan briskly walked toward the register, where Min was already handing over her receipt, her hands trembling slightly. The cashier, a young new hire, was trying to scan the barcode on the faintly printed sheet. The scanner wouldn't pick it up. Megan snatched the receipt, skimmed it like it was a useless scrap of paper, then looked up at Min with a distant, icy expression. "This isn't a valid receipt. The barcode's incorrect. We updated our system 2 weeks ago," she said, her tone as cold as steel. Min tried to explain, her voice shaky. I order online already. I pay. Just want to check noodle pack." Megan didn't flinch. "You're not allowed in this section without a valid receipt. We don't permit customers to re-enter once they've picked up their orders. And honestly, this paper, it looks very self-printed." Min's eyes widened. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the tone. She looked back at the receipt, pointed to the store's logo, the payment amount, the itemized list. Megan shook her head. "Not standard. Unacceptable. You need to leave, right now." The cashier glanced at Megan, as if wanting to speak up, but then looked down instead. Other people in line began to take notice. A middle-aged man glanced over, but said nothing. A young woman quietly raised her phone, recording the moment. A little boy clung to his mother's hand, eyes wide, unsure of what was happening, but he could feel the chill in the air. Min tried to force a smile, but it never made it to her lips. She set the items down, first the lemongrass, then the scallions, then the noodle pack. She hesitated as she held the fish sauce, then gently placed it down, as if afraid it might shatter. She bowed her head, pulled the cloth bag over her shoulder, and walked away. No one stopped her. No one spoke. No one asked, "Can I help you?" No one. But someone had seen everything. He didn't film. He didn't comment. He didn't step in. He simply stood there a few feet away by the magazine rack, holding a shopping basket with only 2 items, a carton of almond milk and a bag of roasted coffee. His name was Edward Tanaka, and the woman who had just been humiliated wasn't a stranger. When he was a child, he'd eaten pastries she had baked. He'd heard her wish him a happy new year in a mix of broken English and soft Vietnamese. He'd seen her deliver porridge to his home when his mother was sick. She never had much, but somehow always had something to give. A dish, a smile, a warm presence. Once, when he was just 10, she told him in broken English, "Don't worry, Eddie. Just eat what you like. You small now, but heart big." Now, watching her stand quietly in shame, Edward didn't feel sad. He felt angry. A slow, silent fury, not loud or explosive, but deep. Deep enough for him to leave his basket behind without buying anything. Deep enough for him to walk out of the store without saying a word. He didn't need coffee or milk. What he needed was to understand what had happened to this place, the place that once stood for kindness, for values he and his mother had built from nothing. Hawthorne's Market had once been a dream. What was it now? And he wasn't going to send an email or schedule a Zoom call. He would find out for himself, not as a founder, but as someone who was listening. Saturday morning, a thin veil of mist still clung to the sky. Sunlight had yet to break through, but the sidewalks were already swept clean and delivery carts had begun to roll. On a southern street of the city, where the headquarters of Hawthorne's Market stood, a modest but well-kept two-story glass building, Edward Tanaka sat alone at a small desk in the attic. This aging room no longer appeared on the company's current organizational map. Years ago, it was where he and his mother had drafted the earliest principles for this retail system. Not the most, just the right. A simple slogan, but one that once carried weight for many. He poured himself tea, no sugar, no honey, just the way he always had. His hands flipped through a stack of printed letters from the company's physical mailbox. Most were complaints, delivery requests, financial summaries. But one envelope stood out, small, unmarked, sealed with old tape, its corners yellowed. He opened it without expecting much, but his eyes froze at the very first line. "I'm no longer afraid of losing my job because I've already had my dignity taken." The letter was handwritten, the strokes slightly shaky but clear. The writer identified herself as Judy Ngo, a veteran cashier at Branch 22. She had worked there for 14 years, since the store was just a local name. She recounted how, over the past 6 months, the new management had been quietly phasing out older employees, not by directly firing them, but by shifting their schedules, reassigning them arbitrarily, forcing them into physically demanding tasks, then labeling them inefficient. People like her didn't scream. They just disappeared. At the end of the letter, Judy asked for nothing. She simply wrote, "I think you should come take another look at your own store, not to save me, but to see what's being twisted, in silence." Edward set the letter down, not reacting immediately. He looked out the window. Branch 22 was just a few blocks away. It used to be the pride of the entire network. What was it now? He stood up, opened the closet, and pulled out an old coat and a baseball cap no one would recognize anymore. Before leaving, he retrieved a small item from his desk drawer, the original employee badge of Hawthorne's Market. No longer valid, didn't need to be. He didn't use the company car, didn't call ahead, didn't message anyone. He simply walked. 14 minutes later, he entered the store at Branch 22. No one recognized him. He had deliberately avoided looking like a CEO. White sneakers, khaki pants, gray shirt. He took a shopping basket, placed nothing in it, and simply pushed it slowly. His eyes didn't scan the products. They watched the people. The cashier was new, clearly untrained. A customer had a question about a promotional item, and the young girl fumbled for an answer. The person behind began to show frustration. No one came to assist her. No manager stepped in. Edward saw the uncertainty in her eyes. Not incompetence, but abandonment. At the end of the produce aisle, an elderly man was arranging carrots in a basket. He wore gloves but moved slowly. Nearby was a new notice board. "We are committed to rejuvenating our workforce." Edward nodded slightly. Short, but the message was loud. He reached the seafood section, where a middle-aged woman was cleaning a refrigeration unit. She kept her head down, silent, avoiding eye contact with customers. Her name tag read, Maria. When Edward nodded a greeting, she responded with a tired, polite smile, the kind worn by people who once had hope. He remained there for nearly an hour. Not a single supervisor approached to ask if he needed anything. No one questioned why a man buying nothing was walking around the store, not because they didn't notice, but because they had grown used to not noticing. That afternoon, he visited 3 other branches. The pattern repeated. Employees avoided eye contact. Policy posters filled the walls, but photos of long-term staff were nowhere in sight. At each place, Edward recorded something, not in a notebook, but in memory. A teenage boy in an apron being scolded publicly for spilling water, while the manager stood back with arms folded, watching as if it were theater. An elderly Filipina woman turned away because she lacked a valid e-receipt. A young man of Haitian descent requesting a shift change for family reasons. Labeled inflexible, needs attitude coaching. No one shouted, but something was rotting. By nightfall, Edward returned to the office. He wasn't tired, just quiet. In one afternoon, he had seen more than in the entire past year. Not because the reports were wrong, but because they were right, in the most deceptive way. He sat at his desk. Only then did he take out his personal phone. He didn't call his assistant, didn't contact the media. He reached out to one person, Min. No one knew where he found her address, maybe from an old form, maybe from memory. Her apartment was in an aging complex in Little Saigon, a little ways out of the city. The hallway lights glowed a dull yellow. The wooden stairs creaked. When he knocked, there was no answer at first. After a moment, she opened the door. Her eyes were still sharp, but held a guarded look. She didn't recognize him right away. "It's me, Tanaka. Edward. Little Eddie." A pause. Then her eyes softened. She invited him in. The small room was tidy. On the table was a pot of porridge, still steaming, beside a bowl that hadn't been touched. He noticed the lemongrass stalk standing in a glass of water and a nearly empty bottle of fish sauce. "You still cooking?" he asked. She nodded. "She's coughing. Won't eat anything. Only wants chow." "Your granddaughter?" "Number the girl next door. Her mom passed." "I'm just helping. Poor thing." Edward looked at her, at the face that had once brought him comfort when he was just a confused child fumbling with a spoon. Now she was still the same, still small, still asking for nothing, still being turned away by the very place built on the values she had helped instill. He said nothing more, because sometimes words aren't necessary, only clarity is. Monday, 7:12 a.m. The city was still drowsy, but the central office of Hawthorne's Market was already glowing with lights. On the third floor, home to the Tradition and Employee Training Room, a group of staff members were rearranging the recognition board, honoring those who had once helped build this store chain. The large oak board hung in the center of the room, engraved with the names of nearly 200 of the company's earliest employees, those who had worked continuously for over a decade and played pivotal roles in the founding and expansion years. Among them, the name Min Lei had once appeared on line 8, just below Tanaka Fumiko, Edward's mother's name. But this morning, that name had been taken down. There was no alarm, no protest, just a quiet decision under the brand image enhancement policy with the reasoning, focus on honoring individuals who remain actively engaged. Edward Tanaka stood behind the frosted glass, watching the young employees dismantle the board without the slightest idea of the significance behind the names they were removing. The tech assistant even muttered, "Who's this Min lady anyway? Sounds like a cook or something." The girl beside him replied, "Probably retired in the dinosaur era, might not even be alive anymore." Edward didn't walk in. He simply turned away slowly. He knew exactly why Min's name had been taken down. Not because she no longer mattered, but because she made them feel ashamed. Her presence, even just in name, was living proof that there were people who once belonged here, who once contributed, who once stayed not for KPIs but out of trust. And in a system obsessed with performance, a presence like that was inconvenient. Edward returned to his private office, locked the door, and opened the old personnel files he had kept in paper form. People like Maria, the seafood section worker, Judy, the woman who wrote the letter, and Marcus, the African-American security guard who used to work at Branch 5, all of them had once been praised in internal newsletters 10 years ago, each with a short commendation, always punctual, eager to learn, loyal like family. But in the new HR system, they had been tagged as transferred due to lack of adaptability, lacking in tech skills, or worse, incompatible with brand image development strategy. He read each line as if someone were clawing at his memory. The name Angela Lopez, once the assistant head chef during the company's first expansion phase, the one who created 12 of the chain's best-selling salad recipes, was also gone from the innovation registry. In the most recent quarterly report, those dishes were listed as Products from the Regional Menu Research Group. No one remembered who created what. They only remembered who now held the microphone. Edward sat quietly staring at his old employee badge. The faded print, the barely legible name, the black and white photo taken when he didn't yet know how to tie a tie. On the badge was the line, employee number, 00001. He picked up the badge and walked down to the basement, where old, unused items were still stored. There he found the original sign that used to hang at the first store. Hand-painted words read, "We don't sell food, we offer trust." The sign was faded, its wooden edges chipped, with old grease stains, but the message remained clear. He placed it on his desk, without cleaning or restoring it. He simply sat and looked at it. Not long after, he powered on his personal laptop, not the company's internal management system, but an Excel file saved since 2012. In it was the full list of the 46 founding employees personally recruited by him and his mother, all of them immigrants, minorities, people who had once been rejected elsewhere. Half of them had left the company. The other half, either reassigned or removed from official records. He marked them all, then began making phone calls. Not as the CEO, but as Edward, the guy who ate your flan at the 2013 year-end meeting. The first person he called was Angela Lopez, now a temp worker at a small sandwich shop. She didn't believe it was him at first, thinking it was a prank. But when he mentioned the honey mustard dressing she once created, she burst into tears. Next was Marcus, now working as a mall security guard in the suburbs. Edward went to see him in person. When Marcus saw him, he simply nodded, asking no questions. He didn't need a reason, only someone who still remembered he once existed. That day, Edward took no notes, wrote no reports, used no recorder. He just listened, and he discovered that every disappointment had a specific name. The name of the person pushed off the morning shift despite having the most seniority. The name of the one dismissed for not fitting the brand aesthetic. The name of the one who rewrote the entire training procedure but was never credited. All those names had been scrubbed from the official system, but in Edward's mind, they were still vivid. He returned as dusk settled. On his desk, Judy's letter still sat. He picked it up, flipped it over, and found one handwritten line. "I don't expect anything. I just hope someone remembers." And he knew it was time for all of them to be remembered again, not with slogans, but with truth. Wednesday, 4 p.m. The sky was overcast and the air cooler than usual. Hawthorne's Market Branch 9, one of the largest stores in the downtown area, was bustling with customers as always. Yet something in the air felt cold to anyone paying close attention. Not the air conditioning, not the wind. It was the chill of haste without purpose, of forced smiles that never reached the eyes, of footsteps that avoided eye contact. Edward Tanaka had been standing in the produce section for nearly 15 minutes, yet not a single employee asked if he needed anything. In his cart were only a bunch of celery and a piece of ginger, but he wasn't focused on groceries. He was watching and listening. Near the carrot display, an elderly man was pushing a cart piled high with surplus produce, items that would be sorted out back for the juice counter or rerouted to agricultural processing. His name was Bill, an African-American logistics worker, just past 60, with a slightly stooped frame and a quiet but determined face. Bill had been with the store since it was just a kiosk in the Old Town Market, one of the few employees who had never taken more than 3 consecutive days off. But now no one seemed to remember that. His cart jammed at a turn between the radish and bagged salad sections. One wheel got caught in a floor groove. He bent down, trying with all his strength to lift it free, but something wasn't right. Nearby, 3 younger employees chatted about shift schedules. They clearly heard the struggle but didn't look back. One of them, wearing a name tag that read Ethan Supervisor, glanced over briefly, then went back to scrolling on his phone. Edward stood just 3 meters away. He saw everything. Bill gave the cart another heave. This time it veered off course and bumped gently into the shelf. A bag of carrots fell to the floor. Bill crouched to pick it up, but Ethan walked over, voice not raised, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "Bill, you need to be more careful. This is a customer area. Don't create extra problems." Bill didn't look up. eyes fixed on the bag of carrots. Sorry, the cart jammed. Ethan shook his head. You should let someone else handle this. Maybe try something lighter. Might be time to consider stepping back. There was no concern in his words, just the weariness of someone who saw patience as a burden. Bill nodded, didn't argue. He placed the bag back in the cart and pushed it forward, more slowly and more silently than before. Edward left the produce section without a word. He circled to the back of the store, toward the delivery and logistics area. There he saw another part of the system, people who quietly shouldered the load, not through job titles, but through muscle, habit, and a patience that went unnoticed. A young woman of Mexican descent was organizing crates of strawberries, her gloved hands stained, face dotted with sweat. Her name tag read Carla, and someone on a walkie-talkie was instructing her to move the load inside. 2 minutes late already. No one asked if she'd had lunch. At the end of the hallway, near the equipment room, there was a staff notice board, with the company's new slogan plastered across it. Efficiency is our priority. Experience is our promise. Edward read the words, then looked at the people living beneath them. He understood immediately. No one here felt any experience except fatigue. As Edward returned to the customer area, he spotted Bill again, now sitting on a bench by the front entrance. In his hand was a small bottle of water, his eyes fixed on the parking lot. Edward walked over and sat down at a respectful distance, not too close to make him uncomfortable. Cart's a bit stiff today, Edward said softly. Bill turned, slightly surprised by the stranger making conversation, but then nodded. I think the axle's rusted. I reported it, but no one's fixed it. Edward smiled faintly. I replaced a cartwheel back in '97. No repair budget back then, so I did it myself. Bill raised an eyebrow. You used to work in the back too? Edward replied, something like that. They didn't say much more, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence shared between people who'd been around long enough to know where a problem lies without having to explain it. As Bill stood to return to work, Edward added, if someone were to ask, would you want to change roles? Bill looked at him, head tilted slightly, then gave a gentle shake. I just want to keep working. Not for the money, just because I've still got enough left in me to be useful. That's all. Edward said nothing else, because that answer was already heavy enough. Not just for him, but for an entire system that had begun to forget. Working isn't just about meeting targets. It's about being seen, being acknowledged. The cart today wasn't just stuck in a groove. It was a symbol for the people being wedged between pretty slogans and cold realities. And if no one fixes that wheel, one day the cart will be discarded, not because it's broken, but because someone thinks it's too bulky. Edward knew from today forward he would begin, not just fixing one wheel, but fixing a system that had allowed people to see another human being as something to be replaced. He left Branch 9 near sunset. It wasn't raining, but something landed in his mind like falling water. Quiet, cold, and repeating. On his way home, he stopped at a hardware store nearby, bought a screwdriver, a bottle of lubricant, and a spare cartwheel. No one knew why, but he did. Saturday, noon. At the dining area behind Hawthorne's Market Branch 14, where customers could buy salad, sandwiches, or soup and sit on long wooden benches by the window, Edward Tanaka sat alone, holding a cup of hot tea, watching everything through the thin veil of steam rising from his cup. On his left was a group of 3 Asian women, likely Vietnamese or Laotian, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally mixing in a few incomplete English words. To his right was an elderly Guatemalan-American woman, slowly tracing each line of text on a yogurt container with her finger, eyes filled with worry, as if one small mistake could lead to being misunderstood. No one spoke loudly. No one disrupted the atmosphere. But within the noisy hum of the store, these people existed in a different space, a space of caution, of restraint, and silence. Edward didn't need to look closely to know who these people were. They weren't ordinary customers. They were the ones always one step behind, because of language. Not because they didn't understand, but because they feared being misunderstood. And in today's highly digitized system, with cameras, customer feedback reports, loyalty cards, and digital IDs. One misstep was enough to be branded for life. He ordered a coffee, waiting for the staff to return. The barista was a young man with a shaved head, one earbud in. When Edward asked about sugar-free coffee options, the boy replied curtly, "Got decaf." Edward nodded. But when the elderly woman beside him asked about lactose-free milk, the boy just said, "Don't know. It's on the label," and walked away. She looked down, flipping the carton in confusion. Edward leaned in gently and said, "You're looking for lactose-free, right?" She nodded. He pointed to a carton on a nearby shelf. She smiled, a smile of both gratitude and apology, as if she was sorry for being a bother. As he returned to his seat, memories began to surface. Not the kind from formal reports, but the ones he had seen firsthand. A Chinese man being scolded at checkout for not understanding a promotion had ended. A Filipino woman backing away from a counter because a staff member had pointed rudely and barked, "Wait!" A little Arab girl pulling her mother away from a counter because she was scared her mom would mispronounce coriander. These moments, seemingly small, accumulated into a different kind of language, the language of silent exclusion. Near the end of lunch, Edward asked if he could sit with the three Asian women he had seen earlier. They hesitated but nodded. He opened with a few simple Vietnamese phrases. They were surprised, then offered shy smiles. One woman, named Kook, worked at a nearby restaurant and had been shopping at Hawthorne's for nearly 10 years. She shared in a trembling voice how she had been followed by security 3 times, simply because she walked too slowly through the cosmetics section. Once, she held up a bottle of sunscreen, struggling to read it, and was asked to put it down. She didn't argue. She returned it to the shelf. Since then, she had never entered that aisle again. The second, named Lon, once had a coupon rejected because she misread the expiration date. When she tried to explain, the cashier scoffed, "Next time, read carefully, or ask someone who speaks English." Lon said nothing. She paid full price and walked out with her ears burning in shame. The third, Mai, around 50, had been asked to leave the checkout line for disrupting the payment flow. All she had done was take out her glasses to double-check the product code. No one shouted at them. No one insulted them directly. But all of them had been humiliated in ways that couldn't be pinpointed or reported. And because of that, no one stood up for them. Edward didn't preach, didn't make promises. He simply listened. And when they asked what he did for a living, he smiled and said, "I used to work in retail. Now I'm trying to understand everything again." They nodded unbothered. In their eyes, he was someone who listened. And to them, that was enough. Before leaving, Edward took a small piece of paper, wrote a short note, folded it, and handed it to Lon. "If one day you feel like you no longer want to stay silent, call this number." Lon accepted it without question, just nodded. No explanation needed, no English required, just trust. That afternoon, Edward visited 3 more branches. The same story played out everywhere. Voices that didn't rise from the throat, but from the eyes, from trembling hands pulling out a wallet, from footsteps slowing as they approached a sign written in English only. They didn't speak English well, but they knew when they were being looked down on. And they remembered. When Edward returned home, he sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and created a new file. He titled it, "Unspoken, Undeserved." In it, he began writing each story in his own words, not for reporting, but so they wouldn't be forgotten. Because if no one recorded them, those stories would vanish, like voices swallowed by the noise of the system. And a system that can no longer hear the quiet voices is a system already beginning to fail. Thursday, just before 8 a.m., the lights in the 14th floor apartment at Eden Grove Commercial Complex on the city's west side were on earlier than usual. Inside, Megan Farrow was adjusting the collar of her crisp white blouse, glancing quickly at the mirror by the front door. Her lipstick, just bold enough to look professional, but not too bright to seem showy. Her dark brown heels had been freshly wiped, her hair neatly tied in a bun, with no loose strands. She always left the house before 8, arriving at the store 15 minutes ahead of her staff, just early enough not to be seen as overbearing, but just on time to command a space where every gaze understood. She controls this room. For nearly 2 years now, Branch 17 under Megan's management had consistently ranked among the top stores for order fulfillment speed, reduced operating costs, and loss prevention. She had never allowed an internal audit to score under 90%. Within the company's system, she was the poster child of the new generation manager, young, emotion-free, and in total control. But what the reports never mentioned was that at Branch 17, no one knew each other's birthdays. No one invited each other for coffee after shifts. There were no celebrations for newborns, no words of comfort after an accident, because everyone understood those things weren't encouraged here. Megan didn't hate her employees. She just didn't want to get involved in things that didn't generate growth metrics. In her mind, anything outside of KPIs was emotional overhead. And emotion, as she had been trained to believe, was the enemy of operational efficiency. She once joked during a team meeting, "I don't care what you think, as long as you do it right. And if you do it right, I don't need to think about you at all." People laughed, not loudly, but enough to make her feel satisfied. For Megan, it all stemmed from one belief. Emotions were what got her left behind. She grew up in a modest household. Her mother, a public elementary school teacher, was once transferred for defending a disabled student against an unfair grading system. After that, her mother lost her homeroom position, her bonuses were cut, and she was eventually forced into early retirement for being a poor cultural fit for administration. Megan was 13 then, standing in the hallway, watching her mother's name being crossed out of a meeting roster like someone voiding an incorrect item off a receipt. She had asked her, "Why are you crying for telling the truth?" Her mother didn't answer, but from that day on, Megan started learning how to leave feelings out of her work. She entered retail at 23, starting in the stockroom, then moving to inventory control, then floor supervisor, assistant manager, and finally promoted when her predecessor went on maternity leave. She learned how to say the right things, avoid the unnecessary, and stay within the safe zone. She didn't hate older people, but she disliked slow ones. She wasn't racist, but she avoided hiring people with heavy accents, not out of malice, but because she feared they might cost her points during audits. Megan had twice rejected applications from candidates over 60, even though they were experienced. Once she wrote the reason as, "not brand forward." Another time, "physical readiness questionable." No one challenged it. Her files were always clean, organized, and by the book. But what Megan didn't know was that in Edward's eyes, the founder who had been watching her from a distance, everything she tried to hide was as visible as if it were under a spotlight. Edward had visited Branch 17 twice in the past 3 weeks. The first time, he posed as a customer asking about organic rice flour. Megan didn't recognize him. She wasn't rude, but when he spoke in a soft, slightly slow tone, she glanced briefly and answered with near-scripted speed, "It's at the end of the left aisle. If it's not there, it's out." No smile, no follow-up, no goodbye. The second time, he posed as someone inquiring about job openings. This time, he brought along a friend, a Colombian man, who had once been one of Hawthorne's earliest employees. They asked about a delivery position, handing in an application. Megan didn't outright reject it. She glanced at the paper, placed it on the table, and said, "If you can't be clearly understood on the phone, this role's not a fit. We need someone with quick reflexes." The friend left without a word. Edward, standing in the parking lot, saw him clutch the application, then drop it into a trash bin near the door. Megan wasn't evil, but she had chosen the wrong people to treat like they didn't matter. That Saturday, the Hawthorne system announced an upcoming round of cultural operations audits across all branches. Megan received the email, skimmed it, and dismissed it. She knew how to handle these types of evaluations, tidy up the bulletin boards, pin up team photos, have 2 enthusiastic employees speak, prepare the internal report. She'd done it all before, but this time there was one small difference. On the list of auditors scheduled to evaluate her branch, there was no Edward, no CEO, no vice president, no one with an obvious title, but there was one blank box, no name, no role, just the words, "Observe silently." And in that blank space, she was about to meet herself, not through the eyes of a supervisor, but through the very mirror she had built. Monday, A light rain fell. The streets were soaked, but the old archive room behind Hawthorne's main warehouse remained dry in its cold, detached way. The room wasn't large, had no air conditioning, lit only by yellowing overhead bulbs, with the musty scent of aged paper mingling with the dryness of old printer ink. This was the place where things no longer needed were kept. Obsolete invoices, expired protocol forms, outdated quality check records. No one visited often anymore, except for Clifford, an elderly clerical staff member who had worked nearly 4 decades and was, in many ways, forgotten by the system. But Edward Tanaka had not forgotten. It was Clifford who once kept handwritten payroll books in the company's earliest days, back before any software existed. And now he was the only person who still knew exactly how the internal invoice formats had changed, when, why, and how. Edward tapped gently on the foggy glass door of the archive room. Clifford looked up, squinting, then nodded. He didn't ask many questions. He just gave up his seat. Edward didn't have to introduce himself. He simply said, "I'm looking for the old version of the online invoice from branch 17 before the 5th of this month." Clifford didn't ask why. He simply stood, opening file boxes one by one, flipping through binders with hands that trembled, though his memory never wavered. 15 minutes later, he placed a stack of papers in front of Edward. At the top was the previous version of the printed invoice, smaller font, logo aligned to the left, no border around the QR code, and right on top of the stack was one folded sheet, slightly crumpled at the edge. Clifford furrowed his brow. "I remember this one. Someone filed a complaint, but the system marked it as resolved on site, so it didn't need follow-up." Edward unfolded the paper. At the top, 15 months ago, 5:12 p.m. Store, branch 17. Items, traditional fish sauce, 1 bottle, fresh lemongrass, 1 bundle, green onions, 2 stalks, rice noodles, 1 pack, and in faint type at the bottom, prepaid, online order ID number 99104. Edward looked at the bottom corner of the receipt, where the system signature should be. Instead of a staff name, it read in italic print, Min Lay. His grip tightened slightly, not from anger, but from the bitter confirmation that chilled him to the core. Min, the woman who had been kicked out of the store, the one accused of shoplifting, had done everything right. The receipt was valid, the order was real, and it had been fully processed by the system. The issue was never hers. It was with someone who hadn't bothered to read properly. And that person was none other than Megan Farrow. Edward held the paper for a long time. Everything began to thread together. Judy's handwritten letter, Land's story, Bill's bowed head, Maria's cautious smile, and the way Megan had said, "This looks self-printed," without checking the system first. And now the final piece was clear. This receipt should have been the proof that cleared her name, but it had been folded, quietly pushed into a forgotten file, as if it were just another mistake to be buried. He asked Clifford, "Why wasn't this followed up?" Clifford shook his head. "I think the system was updating templates back then, and people assumed she brought the wrong form. No one checked carefully. Maybe no one wanted to." Edward didn't blame him. He knew Clifford was just another person left behind in a system moving too fast. But it was exactly for people like him, like Min, like Clifford, that Edward couldn't remain still. As he left the archive, Edward didn't head straight back to his office. He turned toward branch 17. No advance notice. No assistant. No name tag. He walked in like any regular customer, but this time not to observe, to restore a piece of the truth. Megan wasn't at the register. She was in a meeting. But the cashier on duty was Kim, the one who had been standing beside Min that day. When she saw Edward, she didn't recognize him immediately. He held the paper gently in front of her and asked, "Do you remember this?" Kim looked at it, and her eyes paused. She nodded slowly, as if afraid the memory might slip away. "Yes, I do. That day, the system couldn't scan it. But the old lady, I remember, she was very kind. She didn't raise her voice. She just left quietly." Edward asked, "Who made the decision to reject the receipt?" Kim went silent, then said softly, "Miss Megan." But she wasn't really wrong. It's just, we were told to handle it quickly, avoid making a scene. Edward folded the receipt, slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He said nothing harsh, didn't blame Kim, didn't pressure her. But the weight of the moment spread across the room like someone had pulled shut the curtains in the middle of the morning. He left shortly after, but before stepping out, he looked up at the ceiling camera. That camera had recorded everything that day, but no one had ever pulled the footage. No one had reported anything, because the victim didn't scream and the offender didn't pull anyone's hair. That night in his office, Edward opened his computer. He placed the receipt beside the keyboard and typed a new report title to submit to the executive board. The receipt we all refused to see. Not to accuse anyone, but so the system, after all these years, would finally have to face what it had once turned its back on. The truth doesn't have to shout to be justice. Wednesday, 6:47 a.m. It wasn't raining, but the sun hadn't risen either. The air felt like the surface of a still lake. No ripples, no wind. But anyone who's ever rowed a boat knows, a mirror-smooth surface is the hardest to navigate. At Hawthorne's Market's central office building, the lights began to glow on the third floor, where the executive boardroom was located. Inside, the chairs were set, the screen lit, the water poured. But the air didn't feel like any meeting before. Because today, the person who called the meeting wasn't the chairman, wasn't the CEO. It was the company's former founder, who no longer held an official management role, wasn't on the strategic leadership chart, had no private office, no assistant, no personal branding, but whose name still quietly rested beneath the heading Founding Values in the first edition employee handbook, Edward Tanaka. Since stepping away from executive duties, Edward had never once requested a full board meeting. He had stayed on the sidelines offering insights only as an advisor. But this time the meeting invitation was sent with a brief subject line, for internal eyes only. Attendance required. No explanation. No topic listed. Yet everyone, from the Director of Development to the VP of Human Resources, understood. When the founder says nothing, that's precisely when you need to listen. Megan Farrow also received the invite, not directly, but through the regional operations filter. When she saw it, she raised an eyebrow. Meeting with the founder? How performative. But something inside her stirred with unease. She asked her superior, "What's this meeting really about?" No one answered. No one knew. There was no audit scheduled, no internal bulletin. Just a list, naming those who had to be present, followed by a note no one had seen before. Attendance based not on current title, but on actual influence in operations. 8:01 a.m. The boardroom was nearly full. A few whispered speculations circled. Maybe he wants to propose bringing back an old policy? Could be about upgrading the POS system? Some scrolled their phones, but the room fell quiet the moment Edward walked in, unannounced. No one introduced him. No background music. He simply entered, holding a thin envelope and a carefully clipped stack of papers. No laptop, no presentation slides. He pulled out a chair, sat at the head of the table, and looked silently at each person. No one spoke. 30 seconds passed, but anyone trained in reading performance graphs knew. A 30-second silence in a room this full is the clearest signal that something is deeply wrong. Edward didn't glance at his papers. He looked straight into the eyes of the people before him, then spoke a single sentence. "I won't take much of your time. I just want to tell a story." No one interrupted. He began in an even, measured tone, describing a rainy Friday afternoon at a busy store, where an elderly Asian woman was stopped for presenting a receipt that looked invalid. He described how she stood quietly, didn't cry, didn't argue, but gently set down each of her items. He described the manager who didn't ask, didn't check, didn't verify, the cashier who didn't speak up, the security guard who watched, the crowd who said nothing. No one cut in. Everyone in the room felt the story unfolding in front of them, even though there were no slides, no graphics, no video playback. Edward never said any names, but somehow everyone in that room felt they were sitting close to something, shaking the ground. He opened the envelope, pulled out the crumpled receipt he had retrieved from the archives, laid it on the table, didn't pass it around, didn't speak further. The air thickened. Megan, seated near the back, caught sight of the faint outline of the form. Her heartbeat slowed, but pounded heavier. She recognized the misaligned print, recognized order ID number 99104, recognized the name Min Lei at the bottom. She knew exactly what it was. But no one else in that room knew how that paper had once been in her hand, once dismissed by her as not valid enough to process. Edward didn't say her name. He didn't need to, because silence like that speaks louder than any accusation. He asked a single question, slowly. How many of you in this room have ever been praised for keeping the system efficient? A few people nodded. Some chuckled softly. Edward nodded back. Good, but let me ask again. Efficient for whom? And at what cost? No one answered. No one dared to, because that question wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to awaken. Edward placed another sheet on the table, a printout from the customer feedback tracking system. It showed that over the past 3 months, 67% of negative feedback cited feeling unheard. Yet no recorded corrective actions had been taken. He said one more thing. We have a system that listens, but no one is actually hearing. The room fell silent. No phones were pulled out. No one checked the time. No one exchanged glances, because everyone knew. The man before them wasn't condemning anyone. He was holding up a mirror to the heart of the system, and sometimes what unsettles people most isn't being told they were wrong, but being forced to look at what they've chosen not to see for far too long. Edward stood, said nothing more, signed no memo, requested no meeting minutes. He simply nodded a quiet goodbye and walked out. Once again, no one stopped him. No one dared ask. Even after he left, the room stayed still for nearly a full minute. No one spoke first. No one chuckled awkwardly. The feeling was like a storm had just passed. Not a storm of wind, but a storm of truth. And in that stillness, for the first time in many, many years, the system began to hear. Friday, 9 a.m. A previously unknown TikTok account at Mark from aisle 4 suddenly appeared on the For You pages of thousands of users across the U.S. with a video clip barely 40 seconds long. The video opens with an elderly Asian woman holding a cloth tote bag, being turned away by a supermarket manager. A cold female voice says, "This receipt isn't valid. Leave now." The camera shakes slightly as the person filming steps back, but it's steady enough to catch the woman gently setting each item down. A bottle of fish sauce, a bundle of lemongrass, a pack of rice noodles, then lowering her head and walking away. No arguing, no shouting, just a silence so palpable it held viewers in place. And it was that very silence, that quiet surrender, that ignited more outrage than any scream could. Within just 3 hours, the video surpassed 1 million views. The hashtag #, she did nothing wrong, climbed to the top of the trending charts. Hundreds of comments poured in, many from people who had witnessed, experienced, or simply could no longer tolerate these moments of wordless discrimination. "I'm the daughter of a mother who doesn't speak English well. I see my mom in this video," wrote one user. "I got kicked out once just for asking about a sale price 3 times, said another. "This is the first time I cried over a silent video." And comments like that kept coming. At the same time, the video was reshared on Twitter X with the caption, "This woman did nothing wrong, but watch what they did to her." Local journalists started investigating. A reporter from 6 News recognized the store setting in the clip as Branch 17 of Hawthorne's Market and reached out for confirmation. But before the internal PR team could mount a crisis response, another account at Inside Hawthorne's released a second clip, this time pulled from internal security footage. It clearly showed the manager dismissing the receipt without checking it in the system, barely glancing at it before rejecting it outright. The outrage became an eruption. Dozens of reaction videos surfaced. TikTokers reenacted the scene, calling for boycotts, demanding apologies. Within 24 hours, the phrase Hawthorne's Market had appeared in over 30,000 mentions, most of them negative. Immigrant rights organizations issued press releases questioning the company's training policies, language inclusivity, and systemic responsibility. Edward wasn't the one who released the clip, but he knew who did. It was Kim, the young cashier who had witnessed the entire scene that day, who could no longer stay silent. She had recorded the video discreetly, kept it privately stored, and later sent it to her closest friend in the tech support team, who leaked it after seeing that nothing had changed even after Edward's internal meeting. It was the silence from those with power that forced someone without it to speak in the only way they could. Hawthorne's executive offices officially declared a Level 2 media crisis per corporate terminology. Internal emails were sent out marked in red. No external statements. Do not confirm any information. But the tighter the clamp, the wider the leak. A former employee posted on LinkedIn about being forced to resign for not fitting the brand image. A delivery driver, once denied a shift change due to poor communication skills, shared the Min video with the caption, "I didn't speak then, but I will now." Mainstream media stepped in. CNN Digital published an analysis titled Microaggressions in Retail Chains. The Washington Post called it the viral clip that quietly broke a brand. But the most powerful blow came from an 11-minute YouTube documentary by an independent filmmaker, recreating the event with subtitles marking every glance, every motion. The video ended with a stark line. "She didn't need to scream, but we do." Megan Farrow, the manager in the video, was suspended pending investigation. She made no public statement, but in her internal email to HR she wrote, "I meant no harm. I was just following protocol." And that one sentence, when leaked, poured gasoline on the fire. If your protocol gets good people thrown out, then your protocol deserves to burn. Read a top comment on Twitter with over 50,000 likes. Meanwhile, Min, the woman in the video, still had no idea she was at the center of a media firestorm. She didn't use social media, didn't have online banking, had no interest in seeking justice. But in her small apartment in Little Saigon, someone knocked on the door. It was Edward. He brought a bag with him. Inside, a fresh bundle of lemongrass, a new bottle of fish sauce, a pack of rice noodles. She opened the door, looked at him. No questions asked. Just a smile. Edward set the bag on the table, then sat down. They didn't talk about the video, didn't mention social media. They just ate porridge. She told a story about the neighbor girl who had just returned from school, saying that today, "The teacher said we have to speak up when we see something wrong." Edward nodded. "That's right," he said, "but sometimes speaking up doesn't mean yelling. Sometimes it means staying when everyone else walks away." That evening, Edward posted a short message to his personal blog. "I'm not asking for outrage. I only hope kindness will no longer need to beg, and if someone has ever been pushed out simply for not fitting in, then now is the time we invite them back, with our whole hearts." No signature, no photo, yet the post was shared over 200,000 times. Monday, 7:58 a.m. Hundreds of regional supervisors, operations managers, and corporate strategists had gathered in the 6th-floor auditorium of Hawthorne's Market's headquarters for an emergency and open meeting, the first of its kind in company history, live streamed internally to all 118 branches in the system. No one knew exactly what the meeting was about, only that it had been called by the founding council and would include the presence of Edward Tanaka, who had not made an official appearance before staff since stepping down from active leadership 6 years ago. 8 a.m. The doors opened. On stage, there was no branded podium, no corporate backdrop, no music, just a round wooden table, a single chair, and a microphone. Edward walked out, still in his gray button-up, khaki pants, soft sole shoes, no tie, no lapel mic, no introduction. The entire room stood, not because they were told to, but because no one could bring themselves to stay seated. Everyone sensed something was about to break open. He sat down unhurried, pulled a small item from his shirt pocket, a plastic laminated receipt. He placed it on the table. "We've had a lot of reports," he began, voice steady and calm. "Reports about revenue, about operational optimization, about order fulfillment speed. But today I brought a piece of paper, not to report anything, but so we can see ourselves in it." The big screen behind him lit up. A scanned image of the receipt appeared, dated the 15th, with the line, Prepaid online order, number 99104. No one said a word. No one needed to. Anyone who had followed recent events knew exactly what that paper was. Edward continued. I once believed this company would be a place where anyone could be served equally, regardless of where they came from, what they wore, or how they spoke. But a few weeks ago, a woman was removed from one of our stores, not because she was wrong, but because no one bothered to check if she was right. He stood. The screen behind him changed again. An image from the store's security camera. It showed Min, placing a bottle of fish sauce on the checkout counter. A quiet moment, yet thousands of staff watching the live stream held their breath. Edward turned toward the audience. That woman, her full name is Min Lei, was my mother's cook for 6 years. When my mother passed away, Min stood beside me the entire funeral. When I opened the first Hawthorne's Market, she was the one who tested recipes for the hot food section. She never asked for credit, never demanded anything. She just quietly contributed. Her name was once carved into our company's wall of honor. And do you know what happened? He paused. Someone in this very room sent her out the door because her receipt didn't match the new template. No one moved. No one glanced sideways. But on one of the split screens, Megan's face became visible. Drained of color, she sat still, unblinking. She knew everyone was looking at her, even without her name being mentioned. Edward still didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He simply continued. I'm not saying this to place blame. I'm saying this so we all remember. When a system begins choosing speed over truth, image over people, we're the ones kicking good people out the door. He stepped away from the table. No applause, no music. But just then, a tech staff member near the back corner turned on the room's internal audio and played the clip of Min being turned away, this time with subtitles. She did not raise her voice, but she deserved to be heard. The silence in the room was so complete, you could hear glassware clinking backstage. After that moment, the system began reacting in ways no one expected. One employee sent an internal memo requesting to print Min's photo to hang in the staff break room. A regional manager posted a video apology, admitting he had once stayed silent in the face of subtle discrimination. An executive emailed a confession. We place too much faith in procedure, forgetting that a person can be right without the paperwork to prove it. Hours later at Branch 17, where it all began, a small plaque was mounted near the exit. Min's Corner, for those who served before they were seen. No grand ceremony, no live stream. But from that day forward, staff began leaving handwritten notes at that spot. Thank you for your silence, so others could find their voice. Megan was not fired immediately. She was reassigned to the training department, with her first task, rewriting the entire onboarding program, with one focus, recognizing and respecting difference without requiring justification. She didn't object. She quietly accepted the assignment. In her first session, when a new hire asked, "Why did you choose this theme?" she replied simply, "Because I once turned away someone who deserved to be honored, and I don't want anyone else to make that mistake," without realizing it. That night, Edward visited Min again. He brought a wooden picture frame. Inside was a replica of the original receipt, edged in gold with a handwritten note. No signature needed, only to be seen. Min placed it on the table beside a steaming pot of rice porridge. She looked at him and said nothing, then softly murmured, "The fish sauce that day, I was going to cook it for the neighbor girl." She had been coughing for a week, wouldn't eat anything. Edward nodded. "She'll eat now, and so will the system. We'll start over, from the smell of fish sauce and a receipt that was never meant to matter." Tuesday, 1 week after the Turning Point meeting, Branch 17 no longer felt the same. Not because of new decorations, not because of rearranged checkout counters, not even because of any new signage. The most noticeable change was how people moved through the space. Cashiers no longer stared down at the keyboard when elderly customers slowly reached for their wallets. Security guards no longer stood stiffly like statues at the door. They nodded now and then. Stockroom workers, instead of rushing customers out of the way, gently lifted boxes aside. No directive ordered them to act this way. It was just that, after everything, no one felt right ignoring someone who was simply trying to exist. At the far end of the exit, Right where the clearance shelf used to be, an old wooden table had been cleaned and placed with a simple photo frame. Min smiling, holding a bunch of lemongrass. Beneath it read, Min's Corner, for those who served before they were seen. Next to it sat a box of notes and a pen. No one was told what to do with it, but that morning when Edward stopped by, he found the box already full of folded paper slips. He opened one, written in a child's handwriting. Grandma, I don't know who you are, but thank you. I see my mom in your story. Another note read, I used to be afraid to speak English in stores. Not anymore. Another simply said, I used to be silent. Now I'm not. No one signed names. No one took selfies at the table. There were no hashtags. But every word, every scrap of paper, was quiet proof that this corner wasn't just a symbol. It was a scar, carefully stitched. It didn't stop at branch 17. Within 5 days, 27 other branches voluntarily created their own Min's Shelf. Customized corners reflecting local communities. Spaces featuring books about language. Displays of dishes from immigrant cultures. Walls of handwritten thank you notes for those once overlooked. At first, the PR team didn't know what to make of it. But when the acting CEO publicly said, this is not a campaign, this is correction, the entire system understood. This time, no one would sugarcoat it. On the training front, Megan, the one who had stood at the center of the storm, launched a new pilot program, a course titled Languages Not Found in the Manual. At the first session, she didn't speak much. She simply played the video of Min being turned away, then said, I used to think professionalism meant keeping things running smoothly. Now I know real professionalism is knowing when to stop, so you don't hurt someone who's too afraid to stop themselves. The room was quiet. No one needed to ask why she was teaching this class. They already knew. As for Min, her life didn't change much. Same old apartment, same nightly porridge pot, same lemongrass stalk resting on the windowsill. But one new thing. Every week, a few letters arrived, from places she had never heard of. A Cuban-American woman wrote, I was once turned away for mispronouncing my husband's name. I see you in me. A white man wrote a single line. You didn't say anything, but you taught me how to stop. One person simply wrote, I had forgotten my grandmother was once a refugee. Now I remember. Min read each one. She didn't keep them all, but folded a few carefully and stored them in a small wooden box, next to her always-ready stash of rice noodles. One afternoon, she received a phone call from a girl named Lan, a sociology student asking if she could visit to write a thesis called A Story Without a Microphone. Min chuckled and replied, I'm not good at speaking. Can you write it yourself? The girl answered, It's because you don't speak that I want to write. When Edward came by for the third time, she poured tea just like the first visit. They sat facing each other, no formalities needed. He told her about what had changed, the framed picture, the acknowledgments, the return of respect. She listened, nodded, then asked a simple question. Are people changing because they remember or because they're afraid of being seen? Edward answered, At first it was fear, but then it became memory. And if we remember long enough, that memory becomes real kindness. Min smiled, looked out the window, where sunlight slipped through a thin curtain, and said, Good. Doesn't matter why people change, as long as they don't forget they once forgot. March. The air was cool but not bitter. A layer of early spring sunlight settled on the glass walls of Hawthorne's Market like a thin coat of primer. Not vivid, not showy, but just enough to hint that winter was receding. Across the company's 100-plus branches, operations continued as usual. The POS system still beeped steadily. Shelves were restocked. Shifts changed on schedule. But if you stopped and looked closely, you'd notice something had changed. People no longer looked past one another. A slow-moving customer would be walked around, not shoved aside. A wrinkled receipt held by an old man would be examined, not rejected outright. A voice with uncertain English would be met with clarifying eye contact, not cold commands. No one issued a memo about this shift. There were no banners, but it was happening, bit by bit, like the faint smell of fish sauce lingering in the air. No advertisement, but everyone notices when it's missing. The small tribute known as Min's Corner now appeared in 91 branches across the system. Not standardized. Some had only a small shelf with a printed photo. Others built vibrant displays with flowers and handwritten notes. But in every location, the same words were printed for those who served before they were seen. In some places, new employees didn't even know who Min was, but the story was still passed along, hand to hand, like a lesson never written in the employee handbook. Over time, it was no longer just Min's story. It was the story of everyone who had ever been dismissed simply for not knowing how to demand to be seen. Edward Tanaka no longer led the company, but he still came to the office every Thursday. He didn't attend meetings. He didn't sign documents. He just sat in the break room for an hour, looking out the window at the parking lot, watching all kinds of people come and go. He took notes, not on a computer, but by hand, on small pieces of paper. When asked, he would simply say, "I'm tracking something that doesn't show up in reports, the heartbeat of an organization." Then he'd close his notebook, finish his tea, and leave. In her small apartment in the Vietnamese neighborhood, Min still lived simply: morning market trips, noon porridge, afternoon newspaper. Occasionally someone would stop by, a student, a journalist, someone who had once been dismissed for speaking broken English, bringing flowers, a meal, or just a grateful look. She never told anyone she had become a symbol. She didn't use that word. When asked how she felt about the tribute corners created in her name, she only smiled lightly. "I don't think I did anything big. I just didn't want that little girl next door to eat bland porridge." People laughed, then stopped laughing, because they understood that sentence carried something much bigger. One weekend afternoon, that little girl, the one who'd had a week-long cough and only ate Min's chicken porridge with fish sauce, ran over to her house with a crayon drawing, a grandma holding a steaming bowl, with the steam shaped like a heart. Below it, the words, "Miss Min's porridge made me feel better." Min taped it to her refrigerator door, next to an old photo of Edward's mother. The small kitchen suddenly felt warmer than ever. That evening, when Edward visited as usual, Min poured him tea like always. They didn't speak much, but this time she was the first to speak. "Edward, if no one had seen anything that day, if no one had said a word, that would have just passed by, right?" He nodded softly. "Probably." She nodded too. "Then it's good someone did. But I'm not angry. Really, I'm not." He looked at her, didn't ask more. He understood. Some people don't need to win anything. They just need to be acknowledged, to be seen as someone who was once there, who once did something right, even if it was small. Edward stood to leave. Before he did, he pulled a small item from his pocket, a special Hawthorne's membership card, engraved with her name, Min Lay, Life Honor Guest. No discounts, no reward points. But all employees had been trained. If anyone presents this card, smile first. Min held the card, glanced at it, and tucked it away without a word. Edward knew she'd never use it, but she'd keep it. As he stepped out of the apartment, the late afternoon light stretched down the hallway. A soft breeze carried the scent of lemongrass and fried shallots from the porridge pot. Min turned back into the kitchen and gently added a spoonful of fish sauce. Not too much, just enough for the little girl next door to know that today was special. In a world increasingly loud with declarations, sometimes the thing that changes a system isn't a revolution. It's an old woman quietly placing a bottle of fish sauce on a checkout counter and walking away without asking for anything. Until the world finally stops and asks, "Why didn't we see her sooner?" You know, some stories don't need to be shouted to make a difference. All it takes is someone who doesn't look away, someone who saves an old receipt, someone who quietly cooks the right porridge because someone needs it. And sometimes the quietest people are the ones who make an entire system see itself again. If you've made it this far, it means you've walked this journey with us. So tell us, what do you think? Have you ever met a Miss Min in real life? Have you ever been overlooked just because you spoke more slowly, moved more gently, or didn't fit the system's template? Leave a comment honestly below. We read them all, and if you believe kindness doesn't need to be loud, but it deserves to be shared, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and send this story to someone who needs to see it, because somewhere out there, A quiet corner might still be waiting to carry someone's name who was once forgotten.